This is Blue Pool on Glenbrook Brook, I guess, and it's going to be the spot where I do today's recording. Absolutely beautiful autumn sunshine. Hello, Jim 12's here. Today is 22nd of May 2023 and I'm here by the side of Blue Pool, which is on Glenbrook Brook, which is just at the foot of the Blue Mountains, and a glorious autumn sunny day with hardly any wind and lots of flies buzzing across the top of the lake. It's very peaceful here. I can hear a distant aeroplane, but other than that it couldn't be better. Anyway, today I would like to talk about globalism and nationalism again, but in the context of the book The Great Reset, COVID-19, which I started in my previous video, and I'll give a link to that. So really this is a reflection on the book by Charles Schwab and his French collaborator. So a few reflections today on this book, The Great Reset, COVID-19, written and published about June, I think, June of 2020, so arguably 4 months into the COVID era. The first point I want to raise is globalism versus nationalism, and it seems that all the way through this book there's as if there's a push-pull. There's the we have our moral obligation to go for a global solution, but there will be a backlash from the citizens, and that's nationalism, and nationalism, according to the book, is not a good thing. So it's as if there's a tug of war going on throughout the book between globalism on the one hand and nationalism on the other. Globalism being seen as the ideal and nationalism seen as reactionary and negative. Related to that, my second point, the writers talk about the problems we face being global, and therefore we need a global solution. And they quote pandemic, the recent one, and climate change as examples of global problems that we must face as a globe rather than on a national level. But let me put it to you. What if, and maybe I'm sowing a seed of a question, what if the pandemic was actually engineered? A global pandemic, unlike the examples of the Black Death, bubonic plague that they quote. A man-engineered pandemic to create a global problem. And what if climate change isn't the crisis that they claim it is, and therefore doesn't need a global solution? What if CO2, carbon dioxide, is eventually accepted by people as actually a really wonderful plant food and something that we should be celebrating and not outlawing as a toxin? Number 3. There's a constant phrase throughout the book of most experts agree. Most experts agree. And then there's a remarkable silence, because there's no evidence given that most experts agree. There's just the author's assertion that most experts agree. The consensus, and I would argue the consensus, is the biggest threat we face to science, because science always questions. It doesn't agree, it questions, it puts up theories that need to be tested and tested and tested. And even when lots of people might accept a theory, then people can still come and propose another one. So, number 4. Another common phrase is the majority of citizens want a green recovery after COVID-19. And they quote some statistics, but it struck me, and let me take you on a little journey here, if the globalists have governments and major corporations in their pocket who have created a narrative that the planet is in danger of extinction, then surely most citizens will agree that we have to have a green solution. But they have created the majority of citizens' view. So really, they're patting themselves on the back and saying, yeah, we've done it. We've got the people to fear the future, and therefore we have the answer, and it's all wrapped up here in this book, The Great Reset. Number 5. Yuval Harari, a secular Jew from Israel, an academic, he says, recently, this is 2020 I guess, we have a choice: totalitarian surveillance states or citizen empowerment. Totalitarian surveillance states or citizen empowerment. And he contrasts those two. So if he doesn't want citizen empowerment, which arguably is nationalism, he does want totalitarian surveillance states, the digital world, and we all become a number. Number 6. In the post-pandemic era, businesses will be subject to much greater government interference than in the past. And that's a quote from page 138. I'll repeat that. In the post-pandemic era, businesses will be subject to much greater government interference than in the past. As in, businesses will be less independent and there'll be a lot more red tape and scrutiny from governments and regulation. Is that the world you want? I don't. It will stifle particularly small business and the middle class, and absolutely reward the global monopolies. I'm nearly done. A phrase that sticks out to me towards the end, around page 157, was stakeholder capitalism and ESGs, which stands for environmental, social and governance. Stakeholder capitalism and environmental, social governance. And under that heading, they quote, the electricity sector is about being prepared for the inevitable energy transition. Now, you and I are not being asked if we need an energy transition and what sort of transition. We're just being told on page 157 that the electricity sector has to be prepared for an inevitable energy transition. So is China going to stop using coal? Our coal. And if it does, I bet you they would get pretty cross with us. And finally, it's often been said that about this book, The Great Reset, that you will own nothing and be happy. You will own nothing and be happy. Now, I've looked through the book very, very carefully, used my own reading plus, the search engine, and that phrase doesn't occur at all. There are some quotes which I would like to give you, which point to that as a conclusion, but the book doesn't actually say it, and so I'm a bit miffed that some in the alternative media claim that it does. What it does say is this. Listen, page 182. Conspicuous consumption could fall from favour. Having the latest, most up-to-date model of whatever will no longer be a sign of status, but will be thought of as, at best, out of touch, and at worst, downright obscene. So the authors here are making a value judgment about people owning the latest and greatest IT technology, I guess. Another quote which would link to that phrase, oft quoted phrase, you'll own nothing and be happy. Put in simple terms, this is on page 182 as well. Put in simple terms, in a post-pandemic world beset by unemployment, insufferable inequalities, and angst about the environment, the ostentatious display of wealth will no longer be acceptable. So you could turn that round and say you won't actually own anything. And in their other book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, there's an awful lot of talk about companies not having capital, and they quote oft the Uber industry, where Uber doesn't own a fleet of taxis and have to maintain them, but they're owned by the individual. So the company doesn't own anything actually. It owns intellectual property, I guess, but nothing tangible. So all the way through the Great Reset, especially towards the end there is the implicit indication that commodities are going to be a thing of the past, and we won't drive our economies on vast quantities of trade of things around the world. Will be a much more downsized, minimalist way of life, I guess, is what they're saying. And let me finish with this final quote, 183. A similar phenomena can be observed in Nordic countries, with where conspicuous consumption is frowned upon and repressed. But none of this makes them less happy. It's about the only reference to the word happy. Quite the opposite. As psychologists and behavioral economists keep reminding us, overconsumption does not equate to happiness. This may be another personal reset. The understanding that conspicuous consumption or the excessive consumption of any kind is neither good for us nor for our planet, and the subsequent realization that a sense of personal fulfillment and satisfaction needs to be reliant on relentless consumption, perhaps quite the opposite. So what they're saying is things don't matter. You won't own anything, but you'll be happy but they never say it in so many words. Anyway, I commend the book to you. Please don't listen to alternative or mainstream media. Well, they won't mention it, but don't believe everything. Read the stuff yourself. God bless. Bye for now.